In today's episode of Midlife Unraveled, we are chatting with Christy Roberts. Christy is a life and leadership coach, a grief educator, speaker, and the global trainer of self-directed healing practitioners. She's a 5-time finalist in the Australian Small Business Champion Awards, and she was also the 2023 Australian Women's Business Award winner in the Alternative Therapy category. As the founder of Creating Change, Christy empowers leaders, teams, and individuals to thrive both personally and professionally. She's driven by a mission to create lasting change. She is dedicated to raising emotional awareness and grief literacy, empowering people to lead authentic, purposeful, and connected lives. I think you will love this episode. We're talking all about grief, and Christy will also share with us her very, very personal story that really projected her into becoming a grief counsellor. We have some great ideas and things to support both you or loved ones, friends who may be experiencing grief, and it's a very beautiful and positive episode. So I really hope you enjoy. Christy Roberts, welcome to Midlife Unraveled.
Thanks so much. It's awesome to be here.
Now, we are here to talk today about grief. Now, we will talk about grief and trauma, but I wanted to kick off with a big question. How do you define grief?
Great question. Grief for me is I define it as love, because grief and love are very much intertwined. When we lose something that we love, so grief is loss, and the more we love and the more we're connected to that loss, the more grief we will have. So they're directly combined there. So if you think of grief as anything that we lose, and that can be anything, that can be financial difficulties, it can be your health, it could be, there's so many different losses around miscarriages and newborns and all sorts of things, infertility, you name it. We live in a society where people lose their belongings. You know, we have natural disasters, relationship breakdowns, betrayals. A lot of parents are estranged from their children. So, you know, relationship challenges. It comes through in many different ways. So grief is loss. Mm-hmm. And the more you love the thing that you've lost, you know, you lose your job, the more you love the thing that you've lost, the deeper you will grieve. And therefore, for me, grief is love, because it's very much defined by how much you love.
That's such a beautiful and positive way of putting it. How are grief and trauma different?
That's a good question too. I really had to dive into this. We haven't gone into my story yet, but in my experience of grief, which I'm sure we'll cover at some point, it was traumatic, and I had the grief as well. And it was very hard distinguishing between the two. And it wasn't, I mean, I've become a grief educator, and I've done a number of trauma programs now, and now I understand the difference. So now I can actually work out, is this grief that's bubbling up, or is this trauma that's being triggered? And what I've found, and the easiest way for me to language this, because the thing is, you don't want all the language that people don't understand. It needs to be what people can understand. Yeah, grief is like, it's I wish you were here. If you've lost someone, it's I'm sad I don't have this thing anymore. It's the I miss something. It's the I wish you were here, the longing, the sadness, whereas the trauma is a bit different. And I think it's important to say as well on this topic, every trauma has grief, but not every grief has trauma. So some grief experiences are not traumatic. Now, what makes a grief experience traumatic is if it's sudden and unexpected, if it's out of the natural order of life. They're the types of things that make a grief experience traumatic. You know, that suddenness, you're not expecting it. So, for example, suicide, accidents, overdoses. People can be in palliative care, and then something can go wrong with their medical care, and that can still be traumatic, even though you might be anticipating it. Now, how you define trauma as being different to grief, like how you can feel it through the body, trauma tends to show up as flashbacks and imagery and feelings. All of a sudden you'll go to do something and you just get that gut-wrenching feeling, or it could be a smell or a sound. All of a sudden you hear something and it just triggers up the loss or triggers up the experience or the event, because trauma is a heightened emotional response.
Right, so it sounds explosive almost. It's a sudden
can
burst
be.
of... Right, okay.
It can be. It can come. It doesn't have to be explosive though, because not every traumatic event is a big event. We can have lots of little traumatic events along the way. Trauma is usually a heightened emotional response. It's beyond our capacity to be able to process it at that time. It can be very explosive, especially really traumatic sort of grief. But trauma in itself, it can just come through in dreams. It can come through in nightmares. It can come through trauma can come through in many different ways. The way I deal with it's the same. It's learning how to sit and process the emotion and the energy, and then working with the thoughts. It's the same process to work with them, but identifying along the way, is this the trauma or is this the grief? It can be helpful if you're in a grieving situation and it's a long process to recognize, actually, this isn't grief. It's actually the trauma. I need to do some work around the trauma of the experience.
Okay. So, Christy, can you tell us about your story?
Of course. So my background is human resources, organisational development, leadership development. I've worked with leaders my entire career, over 30 years now. And I found in my job, I kind of hit the glass ceiling, and I knew I had more in the tank, but I didn't quite know how to get there. So I started coaching. I did a coaching certificate part-time outside of work. It was a bit hectic there for a few years, but I became a life coach. Yeah. And I became a life coach because I thought that would be really great. I'll become a leadership coach, and thought that would be a great complement to my career. Never expecting to actually...
Well, it sounds like a perfect extension. It sounds like a perfect extension of what you were doing.
Yeah, absolutely. And like just a natural evolution for me. But what I found when I started coaching was I didn't realize how ordinary the majority of us, like, we're living these really ordinary lives. When you start in this coaching world, you begin to recognize what success looks like, and that you can actually move where you're heading, and you can create these extraordinary results, and an extraordinary life is available to each and every one of us. We just have to get out of our own way.
Yeah.
So I began to sort of look at my own life and realize that my life was pretty ordinary. I could do so much better than what I was doing. So that sort of landed me in my own business, which I started back in 20, it's been about 8 years now. I think it was 2017, 2016, around there. And I went full time into my business March 2020. It was the beginning of March. It was right when we were moving into COVID. And I was, mindset coach, leadership, specializing, extraordinary life, all this really cool stuff. And then 2 weeks later, it was the 14th of March 2020. It was the weekend that Melbourne went into lockdown. My 18-year-old son, Aaron, was in a car accident. Now, Anita, Aaron never came home. He literally died on scene. And so here I was, this coach, living your best life, extraordinary, doing all these great things. And then all of a sudden my life literally imploded, like just like that. One phone call and everything for me changed. And that's where the grief and the healing journey sort of hit me, because here I was doing all this great stuff with mindset, and I really understood human behavior. I'd done years and years of work, but I had no idea about grief. Like, the depth of the pain and what I was experiencing was just, I thought I was going to die.
And the suddenness of it as well. Like, I can't even imagine.
No, and it is very hard to articulate this because it's so deep that words, it's like they're almost not palatable for public consumption, to experience what it was. But I'll have a go, because I've been practicing. Like, my digestive system literally stopped. So I wasn't digesting the food properly. My system went all AWOL. I lost 5 kilos. I was still eating, but I just lost weight. I was getting heart palpitations. I had chest pain. It was moving into my throat. I
Oh my
thought I wasn't going
goodness.
to be able to get to Aaron's funeral because I thought I was getting COVID. Because remember, this is when Melbourne went into
Yeah.
lockdown. And, I had to deal with all that funeral stuff at the same time. Like, it was crazy. And I had done enough work to know that I didn't need medication. I'd done enough work to know that.
Mm-hmm.
But I also knew if I went to the doctor, that's the first thing they'd give me.
Yeah.
Because that's
Which
the medical
for
model.
some people is probably the best. It could be the best thing for them. But I think with the knowledge that you had, you realised that wasn't the right choice.
I think we're way too quick to prescribe. I think here in Australia, the stats are alarming. We have the second highest rate in the world for prescribing antidepressants and anti-anxiety medication in the world.
Wow.
It's like our go-to. Yeah, it's our go-to,
Okay.
and when I won the Australian Women's Small Business Champion Award for alternative therapy, I'm like, why is what I do alternative? Like, we should learn how to feel our energy and our emotions and learn to understand grief and process the thoughts before we go to medication. But you are right. There are absolutely cases when medication's necessary. If someone needs medication to get to a therapist, to go to get the support that they need, that's great. But if they're just taking it as a Band-Aid, they're not processing their pain.
Yeah.
If they're using it to avoid feeling pain, yeah.
How did you even begin to process?
Yes, so
we'll go on a little tangents. That's okay, but I really want to
but the story is important.
Yeah, absolutely.
Yeah. So what I ended up doing was I discovered a healing modality called self-directed healing, and this is a healing modality that helps you to process emotion through the physical body. It's energy healing, and I did a session. And I went in, like I said, I actually thought my pain was that physical. I didn't think I could survive. It was a 10 out of 10. An hour and a half later after that session, all the pain had left my chest. My heart had changed. I could speak again, my throat cleared. It was like I'd been in this fog and all of a sudden I could see again. And like I literally biologically shifted the chemicals in my body. And through that experience, like, it became like a lifeline. I thought, I have to learn how to do this because I needed to do this. So I became a practitioner like 2 weeks later. She was running a practitioner training, and then
can I just ask you, how did you even come across that method? How did you even come across that method at that time?
Yeah, well, it's those sort of synchronicities of life. The day before Aaron died, I was working at a festival. And I was managing one of the workshop spaces, and one of the ladies came in, Claire Besley, and she ran a workshop on how to heal yourself, she's the founder of Self-Directed Healing. And I took photos of her and got her phone number and said, I'll send them through. So I had her number, and then I watched these people go through this group healing. I'd never seen anything like it because I was all mindset coaching, and I just couldn't believe this experience that they went through, and it was the only thing I could think of that could help me to move the pain that I was feeling. So that's how I found it. I actually met her the day before Aaron's death, but then I became the trainer. Like 6 weeks after becoming a practitioner, I became the global trainer of practitioners. So I now train globally. It's been quite a fast trajectory because I've been facilitating for 30 years and that sort of thing. The other thing that I've done on my grief journey is I work very hard to find ways to honour my grief. I've become a grief educator, so I'm a certified grief educator now. I've moderated in international grief support groups, and, I run grief workshops and all sorts of different things like that. And, primarily I needed to do that for myself, to help myself, but it's a really great way to create meaning out of that loss.
Yeah. I just can't even imagine the loss of a child is I would say one of the worst things that can possibly happen. How do you even lift yourself to a position of being able to get out of bed in the morning, to be able to put one foot in front of the other? How do you even move into that?
Yeah. Grief is so exhausting. Like, it is so exhausting. So for anyone out there that's listening, if you are struggling to get out of bed, of course you're struggling to get out of bed. If I just, for me, I just had to honor what I was feeling on the day. So when it was tough, I would just appreciate that it's tough. But the main thing I had to do was I had to learn how to feel, because those emotions are there all the time. Like, I cry all the time now. So I actually wear waterproof mascara. It's a great tip, by the way, for all the ladies out there.
Oh,
I put on waterproof mascara the day Erin died, and I've worn it ever since. And so but the tears are my way of connecting. And most of the time when the tears come up now, I can feel them. I call them, in the beginning, they were grief bubbles, but now I call them love bubbles.
that's
Because
nice.
as the grief matures, it's just when it comes up and I miss Aaron, it's like, so I have him, this is my boy, I have him here. So sometimes I'll like look over, and I'll see him, and it just all floods back. Because when you have such a big loss, like if you lose your spouse or a parent or a child or someone really close to you, every day you wake up and it's like you're in this, is this my reality? Like, it's like you remember again. And so every day you wake up and it's like, oh my God, my son's dead.
You
It's
relive the
really
loss.
hard.
It starts again. It starts again.
Yeah. So with the energy, I mean, you have to look after yourself. You need to eat foods that are nutritious. You need to cut out the junk food. You need to move your body. You have to drink lots of water, because here's the thing. The shock, especially if it's sudden, shock dehydrates you and tears dehydrate you. So we already need a couple of litres of water a day, but you actually need more when you're in the early stages of loss. You have to drink a lot. Where I actually got my daughter's friends would send me through Snapchat photos with them drinking water and water bottles and glass, because I said to them, my daughter and I were so dehydrated, but we couldn't remember to drink, because grief brain's a real thing. And so and so you've got to learn to ask for help. And that was one way that her friends could get on board and help us. They did that for weeks. One of her friends, Harry, did it for weeks, until I said, oh, we're good now.
We got into the habit. Did you have much support around you at the time?
No, because it was COVID. So Aaron died the weekend we went into lockdown. So I didn't get the cooked meals. I didn't get the hugs. I didn't get the visits. I didn't have that support. So no, unfortunately I didn't. And I'm sure there's many people out there that are in a similar position that had to go through that on their own. And the other thing about grief is it amplifies your old wounds. So what that means is I actually had an old wound of feeling alone. It was from my childhood. And when I experienced my loss, it triggered this sense of being alone, which was then exacerbated as well by being in a COVID situation. And in many ways that was kind of good, because it gave me some space to just do what I needed to do. It took me a long time. But in other ways, I missed out on the meals because I wasn't capable of cooking. So, I was just, I did have, some support, but it was quite minimal because of COVID.
Wow. And how did the whole experience change you as a person?
It does change you. I mean, you can't go through a significant loss and come out the same.
No.
I feel like my resilience now is, like, I now recognize that I can handle anything. So I feel very strong within myself. I appreciate that that's not everyone's experience, but everyone can get to that place. They might just need some external support to do that. It's changed me in so many ways. I've really focused with my loss on post-traumatic growth. So rather than sort of falling into post-traumatic stress, it's like, okay, Because the thing is stuff happens to every single one of us. Will get thrown curveballs in life. That is what life is all about. And we need to learn the skills to deal with those in a positive way. Now, when I say in a positive way, it's never going to be a positive. I'm not talking about the event. It's never going to be positive that Aaron has died or that someone has lost something. But the way that I respond to that event can be positive. I can choose to eat good food. I can choose to look after myself when my energy is particularly low. I can choose to do grief work. I can choose to reach out for external support. I can choose to ask my friends for help when I need it. I can choose to sit with my pain. I can choose to find ways to honor him. So that's what I've learned. It's not the experience that defines you. It's how you respond to the experience. And if you respond in ways that are empowering, ways that are positive, ways that are resourceful, you'll have a much better outcome. Can't change the fact that this awful thing's happened, but you will absolutely have a better outcome versus if you just fall into a heap and just don't get stuck. A lot of people get stuck in their thoughts and their victimhood and their helplessness and their old pain and their wounds and how misunderstood they feel and fighting with people. And, part of that is normal and natural part of the process, but you don't want to stay there.
Yeah. So how do you start to move out? And I appreciate all the positive things that you were saying, but if you are in that hole of grief and how do you actually start to take that first step?
Yeah, and that's going to be different for everyone because one thing I haven't said is that grief is quite unique and people respond differently. So, some people will be angry, some people will be sad, some people will just go into shame and guilt, what they could have done, should have done, if only. So it's going to be different for everybody. There's no kind of cookie cutter answer, but I would invite everyone to get informed. Like get informed, look it up. There is many grief resources out there. There's many experts out there like myself. I offer free discovery calls. I'm happy to chat with people. I have a YouTube channel. There's many resources out there that are available to us. So get informed. And self-reflection and self-awareness is really, really important. And so is self-compassion. So many of us are not kind to ourselves. So if we can learn to be kind to ourselves and love ourselves a little bit and look after ourselves, that can be really useful. And in the early stages when it's very traumatic and you're kind of on eggshells for those people that are experiencing that, it can be useful to just even learn some breathing techniques to slow your breathing down. Just like a deep breath
to
into
reduce
the belly.
that anxiety.
Absolutely, yeah. Grief is because it kind of gets stuck up here. So most people who have experienced a traumatic loss, your breathing will be shallow.
Yeah.
So when you start and your body needs oxygen just as much as it needs water. So, we need to, everything flowing through our body, but focusing on micro moments can be really useful. If it's too much and it's very overwhelming, you can just go outside and watch a bee.
Yeah,
you can
taking those tiny little moments and
take your shoes off and touch the grass. You can smell the air. You can feel the sun on your face, like slowing it down and just focusing on, if you're at your desk, it's like, okay, like ground yourself. Oh, my mouse is grey. I've got a red band on my watch. My pen is black, my desk is white. You can just ground yourself in the moment. That's if the mind's a bit fractured and it gets a bit overwhelming. So there's many things that you can do, but I really encourage people, anyone struggling, and sometimes even if you're not struggling, because sometimes with grief, especially if you've lost a partner or you've gone through a relationship breakdown or your job's changed, it's a life transition. And working with a coach, someone who can help you kind of navigate and find a pathway that's really empowering for you, that aligns with who you are and what you value, that can
Yeah.
really fast track your results when you reach out and get that external support. But
Because I think
learning
it
to
must be
sit
so
with,
tough. Sorry, not so tough not getting external support, because you can't do it all by yourself. You can't
Mm,
necessarily move yourself through those stages without that support. You may have other people around you, but they're all grieving as well. So nobody is in a position to be external to the situation to give you that support that you need.
yeah, that's a really important point to touch on, actually. Often when there is a grief, especially if it's in the family, everyone around
Mm,
you is grieving as well. And
yeah,
we all grieve differently. So this
yeah,
is where relationship fractures can happen in our grief. A lot of people have issues in their grief because they then clash with other members of the family or
yeah.
or people who are close to them, especially if it's a couple and there's a loss. Often what will happen, I had one lady that I was working with, and she said her brother had died. Her brother had died,
Mm-hmm.
and her parents were in the UK and they were coming to Australia for Christmas. And she said, I don't know what to do with my dad. He needs help. And I'm like, okay, tell me more. And she said,
Yeah.
well, he's just not showing any emotion. Like when he talks about his son who's passed, oh yeah, he was a good kiddo. And she said
Yeah.
he needs help. And her mum were really struggling with his just apparent lack of emotion. And I said to her, I said, it sounds like he might be doing okay. It sounds like
Mm,
you're judging that he's not doing it the same way as you, therefore he's not doing it right.
yeah.
Because he's
Yeah.
not grieving the same way that you are doesn't mean he's not doing it right. He's doing it his way.
Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah.
And we
So,
always
and she
judge
was just like,
our own method to be the right one, but it's not. It's not always the
we all
case.
grieve differently. There are people who are
Yeah.
practical grievers. Practical grievers don't deal with emotion. They don't work in an emotional space. They don't feel emotion in the same way the majority of others do. About 10% of
Yeah.
people are practical grievers. So we're all different. So yeah, she was very grateful. She's like, you've just saved Christmas.
Phew. Oh goodness. Oh gosh, I can't even imagine.
Yeah.
Now, I wanted to ask you, I've heard of the 5 stages of grief, and I think probably a lot of people have heard of these: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and acceptance. Is this something that everybody goes through?
Yeah, I mean, all those stages will be present in any grief. And I've
Hmm.
studied with David Kessler, who was the co-author of On Grief and Grieving, which outlines the 5 stages of grief. So they come from
Yeah.
Elizabeth Kubler-Ross. And they started with, as people die, on death and dying, as people die, what are the stages they go through? And then David and Elizabeth realized and recognized that the grief is the same. Now,
Mm.
a lot of people will say, it's rubbish, the 5 stages, you don't go through stages, but they're not linear. It's not a process that you move through.
Right.
They are
Okay.
literally states of emotion that you will experience at some point. And so that's a really
Mm.
important distinction, because there's a lot of misunderstanding out there around the 5 stages. It's not linear. It's not denial, and then you'll be angry, and then you'll start bargaining, and then
Yeah.
they
Yeah. Yeah.
grief is messy, right? And so when I talk about the stages of grief, it's like, for me, on an emotional scale, if you want to think of a pendulum that swings, it's like a pendulum, and you'll have trauma, deep loss on one end of the scale, and you can have relief on the other end of the scale. Because trust me, there are people out there who feel relieved when someone passes. I've worked with a
Mm.
number of people who have had members close to them of their family who have died by suicide, and they're relieved. And then they feel guilty that they're relieved and ashamed. So they're judging that sense of relief. But there is relief
Why are they
because
relieved?
relieved because their loved one is no longer suffering.
Okay. That
Yeah.
could
So
also be
there's
the
a
case if
sense
somebody
of
was terminally
relief.
ill or, yeah.
Correct. Yeah. So there are, and then there's everything in between, sadness,
Mm.
depression, shock, anger, the guilt. guilt is a big part of grief. The guilt is the
Yeah.
stories that our mind tells us. So guilt, for example, is the I could have done this if I had have done that differently. If only I went there and did that and or didn't go there. If only I had have talked to the doctor. Maybe if I had have done this differently, I could have had a different
Yeah.
outcome. So that's all
I
the guilt
imagine with
stuff that comes up.
suicide, guilt would be a huge part of that as well. Very
Yeah,
different if somebody passes in a, from an illness or something like that. That guilt from a suicide, I should have been there. I should have listened when they said this or whatever it was. I should have been able to help them. That's
yeah,
tough.
it's so tough. And the benefit of hindsight's a wonderful thing, but the thing
Mm,
about guilt is if we had the power to bring them back, or if we had have known, we would have done things differently. And
mm,
so it's learning to actually, it's normal and natural for all that guilt stuff to come up in the first 6, 12 months. But if someone's still
yeah.
stuck in those stories 2 years, 3 years, they need help
Yeah.
because with grief, pain is inevitable. This is important. Pain is inevitable, but
Hmm.
suffering is optional. And the
Okay.
suffering that we can get stuck in is the monkey mind because our mind tries to make sense of something, and death doesn't always make sense.
Yeah.
So our
So
mind
what?
tries to make sense and find control, because that's how we
Hmm.
we like to we like to, everything's got to have its place. But
Organize.
sometimes,
Yeah.
yeah, sometimes things just don't make sense. And
Mm.
so working with those thoughts and the stories are really
Yeah.
important.
So what is the normal, I know everybody is very, very different, but what is the normal time frame that people will move what you would consider they are in a state of grief and in a state of pain, and how long until you feel they should be moving out of that? And if they don't, they are sort of almost choosing to suffer. How long?
So, yeah, firstly, there is no normal because everyone is
Mm,
different. But there are different stages of grief that you can kind of use to guide where you're at. So, the
yeah.
first stage of grief is called anticipatory loss, and that is the grief before the event happens. So, for
Hmm.
example, if someone is ill, or if, someone has mental health issues, or if someone is moving into palliative care, or, you know, I have an
Mm,
elderly mother, so there's a little bit of
yeah.
anticipatory loss going on there, even though she's not dying. My
Yeah.
cat is getting old as well, so I'm already worrying about him. So that's anticipatory loss, the loss
Hmm.
before it happens. So you kind of go into this pre-stage. When the loss happens, we go into an acute phase. And in
Hmm.
that acute phase, it's everything. Like we're all consumed by it. Your system's all out of whack. Your head's that's really exhausting, and it's just everything. And that acute phase can last from 1 month. It could last 9 months. It's different for everyone.
Mm.
Could
Can
be a
I just
year
ask, if
even.
you did have that anticipatory loss, does it mean you don't feel the acute loss as strongly, or is the acute period still as strong, even if you had
Yeah, it's
had a
yeah, it's really interesting because I work with a lot of people, and it's not uncommon for them to go, but I thought I was prepared.
yeah,
I've
yeah,
worked with young teens who have lost their GMA or grandma,
mm,
and then they're absolutely blindsided when the loss actually happens. Because here's the thing,
yeah,
Anita, it will always be too soon, and we
yeah,
will never be ready. We will never
yeah,
be ready. And then there might be other circumstances where people are like, it's time. It was time. It was a natural, beautiful passing.
mm,
It was a
mm,
normal, let's celebrate the life. And
yeah,
that's where sometimes the relief can come in. So some people will
mm,
experience their grief as relief. It's
yeah,
different for everybody. But for those, especially if it's sudden and traumatic, they will go into
mm,
this really acute phase, and that can vary depending on their their personality, their style. There's many different factors, environments,
Yeah.
all sorts of different things. Then we move into early grief, where you kind of start operating in life again, but
Mm-hmm.
it's really tough and it's still quite at the forefront. And that's usually the first couple of years.
Okay.
And then we move into a more mature grief. And I'm coming up 5 years now for Aaron. And
Mm-hmm.
in many ways, I'm definitely in mature grief because I've done a lot of work to get myself here. I
Yeah.
got glimpses of mature grief at around the 2 year point for me, even though I
Mm-hmm.
was doing all the work. So it can vary for everyone. But now it's a lot more mature. I feel the grief come up. I can naturally, organically just sit with it. I'm
Yeah.
okay with it. So I've moved. Acceptance was really hard for me.
Mm-hmm.
I had I really struggled with that. That was probably for me the biggest state. Oh, and sadness. I
Yeah.
really got attached to my sadness because my sadness was
Mm-hmm.
actually serving me. It was keeping me connected to the loss. So I felt like I would never be happy again. I was always going to be sad, and I was very attached to that story I was telling myself. So I had to get a lot of external help for that.
Yeah.
But I have worked through that, and I do feel joy now, and I do feel inspiration and love and meaning and
Yeah.
all those things. But it is a process, and it does
Yeah.
take time. And if anyone's sort of looking at a loved one or someone that they care about, and they think they're there for too long, or they think they should be further along, sometimes that's us not being comfortable with grief, because we do live in a
Mm.
grief illiterate society. It's one of the reasons why I became a grief educator. We don't understand grief. We don't know how to process it. And we suck at supporting people who are grieving. And so sometimes we can think, because I know I had a friend who died prior to Aaron
Yeah.
dying. And I remember being worried about her husband and thinking, oh, 6 months, he should be right by then. But now that I've experienced loss myself, I mean, I was just
Yeah.
so uninformed. It was ridiculous. But that's kind of the psyche out there. Or 6 months, yep, this, that, yeah, right. And then they'll get on with it. No, it doesn't work like that. You literally, with grief, it's not something we heal. It's something we have to learn to integrate, because
Yeah.
we have to learn to live with the loss. So if you're talking about a marriage divorce, you're still going to be divorced in 10 years. So there's still a
Yeah.
part of you that will have that loss. That loss will still be there. If you're talking about a spouse, your
Mm.
spouse is still going to be dead in 20 years' time. My
Yeah.
son will still be dead in 50 years' time. So for me, that
Mm.
grief will always be there, but how it comes through my body will change over time. And there will be times when it comes up and it's really strong, and I just embrace that when it
Yeah.
happens, because it's my love.
Yeah.
It's just a love bubble.
Do you think it's hard to move into that mature stage of grief? I imagine a lot of people would be feeling that they're not honouring the person's memory if they are moving to that mature stage, but sort of hanging on to the sadness and the grief means that they're hanging on to the memory of that person and honouring that person. How do you rectify that with trying to move forward into that mature stage?
And that's exactly what happens to many people. They feel that if they move on in their life, they're saying goodbye. But
Mm.
the work that I do is I help people to create a new hello. So,
Yeah.
so for me, it's about creating a new relationship. So
Mm-hmm.
my relationship with Aaron has not ended because he is not physically here.
Right. That's a really lovely way to put it, actually.
Yes. And so now my work now is learning and finding ways to create a new relationship for him. Last
Yeah.
weekend, my mum has just painted a painting of Aaron, and last weekend we went to the framers and chose a frame. Then we went and bought flowers, and we went up to the power pole where he died. He died in a car accident, and I redecorated it because it was a mess, Anita. I'd neglected it.
Oh.
I find it a very hard place to go. And
Yeah, I can imagine.
yeah, it was a mess. But and then the weekend before that, I went on a grief retreat, which was just the most incredible experience. And even though I'm a professional in the space, I just felt, I went in there, it was at a cemetery. It's like, oh my God, that's a
Oh,
hard place
wow.
to go. And by the time I left, I
Yeah.
saw so much beauty around me, and I felt so much, I hadn't felt that much love in my heart for a long time. And
Yeah.
connecting with
Yeah.
other grievers is really, really powerful. So if ever anyone has an opportunity to go to a grief workshop, go on a grief retreat,
Mm.
it takes courage, but you won't regret
Yeah.
it. Mm.
Yeah.
So it's about
So
creating a new
how do
relationship moving forward.
yeah. How do you support somebody who's grieving? Because I think that's one thing that a lot of people are like, I didn't say anything because I didn't know what to say. I didn't want to upset them. I didn't want to, you know, it's often hard. People don't know what to say. They tend to not say anything. They tend to step away. What do you suggest?
So witnessing people in their grief is really powerful. And what we tend to do, we're raised in a culture where we try to fix things. You know, I have one girlfriend, bless her, all she wanted to do was take me out dancing and have a drink as soon as we could. Now, going out dancing triggered me because Aaron was a dancer, loved to dance and having fun. I wasn't ready to have fun. My heart,
Yeah.
I was still heavy. It's exhausting. I did not want to go out. I did not want to be social. As a bereaved parent, think about this for a moment, or even as a bereaved spouse, a widow or widower. One of the first questions you would get asked in social situations is, do you have a partner? Are you married? And do you have children? And so you've got to have answers for those questions. You've got to practice different answers for those questions so that you feel okay. You've got to recognize that you don't have to answer those questions. Not everyone needs your story.
Yeah.
So look, there's so many things that you can do. Did I answer that question?
Can we have a
Oh,
let's
yeah.
have
No, I
three.
didn't
Okay,
answer the
let's look at
question.
three.
I didn't.
Not really.
I didn't
Three
answer the
tangible
question.
things that you could do.
The question was, how do you support people? So the best thing that you can say to a griever is how, and everyone write this down, how are you feeling today? Not a text message saying, are you okay? How are you? Because I would get a text message saying, how are you? And my mind would just fracture because I couldn't articulate how I was because my mind was so traumatized.
Well, the
The other
natural
thing
response is,
is,
how do you think I am? Like, I've just lost my son.
yeah. And you don't do that by a text message. But remember, we were in
No.
COVID. I was in COVID, so it was a bit different for me. But people will still do that. People will go silent because they don't know how to have the conversation, or they'll see you and they won't say anything because they're worried about triggering your grief. I assure everybody out there, you are not triggering them. They have not forgotten that they've lost someone important or something important to them. If you think they've forgotten, you're insane. What you're doing is you're showing you're prepared to have the conversation. So how are you feeling today is such a good question because it's like, how am I feeling? I feel flat. I'm exhausted. I feel okay today. The reason today is on the end is because every day is different. So you could check in with a friend or someone for a week and they might be fine. And then in a month's time, they might crash again.
Yeah.
So
And I think
we tend to
you're
think, oh, they're
recognizing the
okay.
fact that, you're recognizing the fact that there are those highs and lows, and they may be like, okay, today's an okay day. I'm getting through. Today's not a great day. And I think it becomes a personal question. It moves it away from just, and we say it flippantly all the time. How are you? How are you going? How are you? And the stock standard answer, I'm fine, thanks. Yeah, I'm fine. Like, there's no more meaning to it. There's no more personal touches or anything like that. But adding that one word on the end really does make a difference.
It does make a difference. And there's other things as well. If you ask someone and I remember one friend came over and she asked me how I was and my mind went to pieces, and I'm trying, because your speech, it affects it. If you look at scans of the brain, trauma can affect your speech, like the speech centers. They don't wire up properly. And so I was having a lot of trouble articulating how I was. And I remember pausing and stopping. And then she just changed the conversation and went on to, and I was like, oh. So there's so much power in the pause, because when your mind, when you're in this sort of traumatized, heightened state, sometimes you just need space and time to kind of work out how you are so that you can articulate it. And then if someone starts sharing with you, you have to listen. You don't try to fix them. Don't try to give them suggestions. Don't try to, if only this, or we could have that, or why don't we? No, just go, I'm so sorry.
Yeah.
I don't know what to say.
I think and just to be with them, just to sit with them.
Yeah. You can have, you can go to the movies. You can have someone just to sit on the couch. I don't want to talk. I just want company. There's many ways that you can support, but witnessing someone's pain is the most powerful thing that you can do. And you've got to understand as well, is a traumatized mind will keep saying the same stuff. So if someone's talking about their husband or their wife or their spouse that's passed, and they're, it's like, oh, they just talk about it all the time. I'm so over it. It just wears me down. Their mind is trying to come to terms with their new reality. And when they can say it out loud, it actually helps them. If they're a couple years on and they're still doing that, they need additional support, because you don't want to get stuck in your stories. But certainly in those early first year, you need to give that some space and just be patient. Yeah, you're not there to fix them. You're there to be with them.
Yeah. If somebody doesn't want to get external support, how do you try to help them to see that may be a good path?
It's like leading the horse to water. They need to be ready. Sometimes, it's not unusual for me to work with someone and the grief was 30 years ago. Right. Grief is very patient. Sometimes people will go into survival mode. They don't have the energy or the capacity or to deal with it right now. We are taught not to feel. So a lot of people feel that by having conversations about their grief, they're just bringing it all up again. And why would I do that? I've got some balance here, but they're not recognizing that, I just suggest to people, when people say, oh, I have someone, they need to talk to you, I just send them to my YouTube channel and just say, send them a video.
Yeah.
Just say, hey, I saw this. I saw this lady on Facebook and I just thought this might be useful for you. If you don't like it, just let me know and I won't send anything again. But, just thinking of you.
Yeah.
So
and I think just nice to reach out is positive.
It's really positive. Yeah. Just to, and for the grievers, you don't have to respond.
Yeah.
Especially in those early stages, you will get inundated with messages and you only have so much energy. So kind of pick who you're going to talk to, and the rest, just whenever, if you've got capacity, you might just go thank you and send a love heart. You don't have to get into it with everyone. Everyone doesn't need all the details, because I was overwhelmed with the amount of messages that I got, but I didn't have capacity to be answering them. So that's how I dealt with that. Just because someone messages you doesn't mean you have to message back, because grief really depletes your energy and you need to save it, because you're in survival in those early stages if it's a big loss. So just keep your energy.
That, people should understand that if they reach out to somebody who is grieving, that, we're not expecting a response to come back.
Well, not everyone understands that, but yes, they should.
They may not be your people. Now, Christy, can you please share with us 3 takeaways?
3 takeaways
that people can put into action. Yeah, about grief. Something that if they are grieving themselves, or if they have a friend who's grieving, what are 3 first things that they could look to do?
I think for grievers, the biggest there's several, I mean, there's always many takeaways, but learning to listen to your body is really, really important because your body will guide you. So if you're getting aches, if you're getting pains, everything you feel is there for a reason because the stress will show up in your body. So 75 to 90% of disease is caused by stress, and stress is emotion. And so when your body is super stressed, you need to really learn to listen to your body. And even though it's exhausting, you do need to eat nutritious foods, move your body. You need to learn to process your emotions through the physical body. So you need to learn how to feel. That's the best thing you can do as a griever. That's my key takeaway is, learn to feel. But eating, movement, grounding yourself in nature, all those sorts of things are really, really powerful for grievers.
Yeah.
And for supporters and for people who are supporting someone in grief, you don't have to fix things. People who are grieving aren't broken. I thought my heart was actually broken. And that was the story I was telling myself as well. I was heartbroken.
Yeah.
And then one of my coaches said to me, she said, actually, your heart's not broken. Your heart is responding perfectly, normally, given the circumstances you're in. It's actually doing its job. And I'm like, wow, okay. So that's where, when you talk to other people who get this world, it can really help to change the way that you're perceiving things, the way that you're operating in the world. So getting external support, it's just, I don't think it can be overrated. It's really powerful. I wish it was mandatory, but unfortunately it's not.
Yeah.
The other thing about
in the process, I would think too.
Yeah. The other thing about getting external support is there is a lot of people out there, therapists, psychologists, counselors, who are not grief informed or grief experienced. I mean, I've had horror stories come through from people who have worked with I worked with a grief counselor, and some of the things I hear are absolutely horrendous. And I know, and I've had conversations with people who work professionally, and they'll tell me how they work with grief, and I'm just like, clearly you've not had a significant loss. I can tell by the way that they're talking.
Yeah.
And yet they're helping other people. So just because someone is helping in the grief space doesn't mean that they're good at it. It's like anything. There are good doctors, there are not good doctors. There are awesome psychologists. I love my psychologists. And there are psychologists that aren't great. It's like anything. You can shop around.
Yes. Yeah.
And if you're
take
not getting the results,
as well.
if you're not getting the results, you can ask around and interview them. Before you sign up. Yeah, you have power.
You've got to have that connection. You need that connection.
Yeah, they've got to know what they're doing.
So, Christy, where can people connect with you?
So I am online. My website is christyrobertscoaching.com. I'm assuming you'll drop a link below. I'm on Instagram. I'm on LinkedIn. Yeah, I do a lot of corporate work. I run workshops and work in the corporate space. I have a leadership accelerator program to help leaders become better leaders. And I also have a life reimagined program where I work one-to-one with people who want to change their life. So you'll find all that information. You can book discovery calls. I offer free calls through my website. But you'll find me on the socials. What's my handle? @ Christy Roberts Coaching. And I also have a YouTube channel, Christy Roberts Creating Change, where I've got a lot of videos around grief on there that are quite educational.
Fantastic. Thank you so much. This has been very, very insightful, and hopefully helpful and fascinating for people to listen to. Thank you so much, Christy.
You're most welcome. So, and everyone out there, you're not alone. You can absolutely do this. And so this is about having your journey empowering you rather than it leading you. You kind of want to get that control back and lead a life that you're actually inspired by, because it is possible, even if you've had a big loss. It's absolutely possible to live well again, and you honor your loved one in that journey.
And sending big hugs to anyone who is experiencing loss or has experienced loss in the past. So that's also important, I think.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much, Christy. Thank you so much for joining us today. We hope you enjoyed this episode. Please like, share and subscribe so you can stay updated with more from Midlife Unravelled. To see more Midlife Unravelled, follow us at midlifeunravelled.com or at Midlife Unravelled on Facebook and Instagram. We'll see you soon.